So quick agenda. We're going to talk about the performance improvements of PHP 8. We're going to talk about some of the new features. PHP 8 has a lot of new features, but unfortunately we don't have the time. We're going to talk about a couple of changes that we have made to PHP 8. Breaking changes, this is very important because this is what's going to dictate how easy it's going to be for you to update to PHP 8 or not. We're going to talk about some internal changes that we made that probably you're not going to see in your daily work, but it's going to affect some people that maintain libraries, for example. Damien, hello, how are you doing? And also some behind the scenes of PHP 8's development, because this was the first version of PHP that I followed the development from beginning to end. So I have a couple of stuff to talk with you. And let's get started. Performance improvements. I think the biggest, the most famous, and I think the selling point of PHP 8 is going to be the just-in-time. So just-in-time is something very complex, very big, but very important for the language, which is going to improve a lot the performance of your applications. But I want to highlight one thing. If you already have very, very fast APIs, let's say that you have an API that is returning and processing everything in 20, 30, 100 milliseconds, those APIs, they're not going to be affected by just-in-time because just-in-time is focused on heavy process. So for example, if you're doing machine learning, if you're doing blockchain, if you're doing, I don't know, image processing with PHP, and that those processes are taking like forever, JIT is going to be the one which is going to improve those performance. But for your APIs, it's not going to be that much. Oh, wow. Okay, so Damien has read a benchmark. So XZ, which is a stacked analyzer tool, got 50% improvement from PHP 7.4 to 8. This is amazing. Unfortunately, I don't have any benchmarks because benchmarking JIT is not that trivial. So once we start to have new versions of PHP 8.0, 8.01, 8.02, and then we start to have benchmarks, then for sure we're going to see how important and how big those performance improvements are. As I said, we have a limited amount of time, and JIT by itself is huge. And Benoit got me covered. So Benoit, he spoke last year at Forum PHP in French. So it's going to be way easier for you to understand. He talked about everything about JIT, but I found a very nice talks in the internet. So I have one from my colleague in Brazil. We have Nikita Popov. We're going to talk about this one in the end of the talk. Dmitry, which was the developer of JIT in Russian. So you have 4 flavors, 4 languages that you can see on YouTube, which are dedicated JIT talks. And then you're gonna see why it's important, how was developed, how you configured, how you benchmark, what's gonna affect your applications, and so on. Unfortunately, I don't have the time, but they got me covered. We already have a bunch of content on the internet about JIT. And those were the performance improvements of PHP 8. We have a couple of small ones, but I don't want to spend my time on it because JIT is the biggest one, and this is where you should focus your effort to. Talking about features of PHP 8, we have a lot. We have a bunch of new features on PHP 8. We have more features than PHP 7.0 in numbers of what we call RFCs, which is the formal processing of bringing something to the PHP. But we're not going to talk about everything. We're going to talk about 4 attributes, union types, the match. We're going to talk about it, and name it arguments. And let's start with union types. So if you're not familiar with union types, is basically that mathematical concept of union. So you have one thing or another combined. So in this example, we have union types on lines 5, 8, and 14 in properties, methods, and also return types, parameters, and also return types. But as you can see, this is documented. This is not real union types. We are talking about PHP 7.4 code here, or PHP, whatever. And if you try to use this code and you on line 23, you're passing a string. Oh, there's another PHP 8 JIT talk. Oh, thank you for sharing. I didn't know that one. I'm gonna add to my list. So in this example, if you're using this class, it's not gonna work because there's no real validation. What you can do before PHP 8 is sanitize and treat those inputs. So is either an integer, is either a float? Then if it's not, then you throw an exception. You have seen this pattern in a lot of codes, but in PHP 8, you're going to be able to type your code with unit types, properties, arguments, return types, everything that were documented in the past now is going to be real typed. And in this example, if we try now to use this class passing a string, we're going to have a native type. We're going to have a native error from PHP saying, hey, this was supposed to be either an integer or a float, but you're passing a string. So this is a huge advance for the PHP type system. We have others. We have other additions to unit types, other additions to the type system of PHP 8, but the unit types is the biggest one. One thing, you can use as many unit types as you want. Here you can see that we have more than 5 unit types in this case, and it works just fine. Of course, you can't repeat because that's going to trigger an error, but you can use it PHP unit types as many as you want. But we also have mixed, which was something that a lot of people were like, why do we need it? Do we need it? In my opinion on mixed is we are going to use mixed as a bridge. So you bring a PHP 7.4 code where you don't have type at all. You type as mixed, and then with time you start to specify those types. So I have 3 types, I have 2 types, I have 4 types, and this is how you improve the typing of your the type coverage of your code. Let's put it that way. Yeah, I have to take a break on Twitter, man. Twitter was going so crazy with Corona and everything. But yeah, I still have Twitter. My DMs are open, so if you just want to message me, go ahead. Mixed will be any of PHP. Yes, actually, any was considered as the other from JavaScript, right? Either we have mixed or any. But any is not that common on PHP, on PHP code, PHP documentation. Mixed was a common one, so we decided to go from mixed because then people can just convert the annotations that they have to real types. Thanks, Sebastian, for being the one. Sebastian. And that's unit type. I hope you guys are excited as I am about unit types, because that's going to bring a lot of improvements for the language. But it's not about just that PHP 8. We have also match, which is a new structure in PHP. And what is a structure? If you take, for example, switch, if, else, for loops, those are structures. And match is a new one. It's been a while since we have added an structure to PHP. But what is match? Match is an alternative to switch, because switch has some flaws. To switch, PHP switch is not the best thing in the world, together with other stuff. But what are the problems? This is one problem that we have with switch. On line 3, we have value as string, and on line 12, we have case 2 as integer, and PHP consider this thing as equal, and switch uses equal by under the hood, which some people don't think is right, because switch should be strictly compared, so using the triple sign instead of the 2 signs. But you know, changing switch is not fundamental. Is a structure that is used like broadly in the ecosystem, so it's not that trivial to change it. And also, there's another thing. If you pass a case that does not exist on PHP's switch, is just going to throw you a warning instead of saying, hey, you're missing a default here. So instead of telling you that, it's going to say, hey, you're just missing the valuable result, which, you know, for debugging purposes is not the best thing. So we have match on PHP 8. I like your hoodie. Thank you. Yeah, it's a PHP 8 hoodie, special edition. I'm going to talk about that later on. And then we have PHP 8's match. Match is, again, something that we brought from other languages. And what is basically an alternative to switch in terms of is more strict, is faster. I'm not going to talk in details how fast it is, but it's faster. And also, it covers a lot of the flaws that switch has. So, for example, here, now we have value as 2, and the case of match is also 2. And you can echoing out a match. Switch, you need to assign to a variable, do a lot of stuff, and then you do whatever you want with a variable. Match is an expression that you can use together with echo. So is way better. And also, if you pass something to match, which does not exist a case, it's gonna throw an error. This is something amazing because during development time, you're gonna exhaust all the possibilities that you have with your match. Of course, you still can have a default, but let's say that you don't want a default. Like, I want to exhaust all the options. PHP now is gonna tell you during development time. This is amazing to avoid those production errors. They are like small ones, but of course, a stack analyzer tool would cut it. But match is here, and I think is here to stay. The third one that I want to talk about today is named arguments. What is named arguments? If you use PHP Storm, you know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to consider that no one uses PHP Storm. And I'm going to take this example to illustrate what is named arguments. We have a function called array filter in PHP, which is very trivial to understand if you walk through this code. You have an array of items. You want to filter the items on line 7, which are integers. And then on line 9, we have the 2 items of that array that are integers. And it's not that difficult to understand. You have 1 argument, 2 arguments. But then you have a function that we don't use daily, at least I don't use daily, which is array fill. You have 2, 3 in PHP. Like, what the hell those arguments are supposed to say? Imagine, this is the output, by the way. You have like 2 PHP, 3 PHP, 4 PHP. So if you try to understand, 2 is the index that is going to start the array, 3 is the number of items of that array, and PHP is the value of all those items. But imagine if you could do this. Starting key as 2, the number of items in that array as 3, and then you have the value of each argument as PHP. It's way easier to understand, right? So you have this in PHP 8. We're going to name all the arguments of our functions, methods, and everything, so you can document your code, and it's going to improve the readability of it. Named arguments or anonymous arguments? Named arguments. Anonymous arguments, I never heard about that. If you can say it later on what it is. I have never heard the name, sorry. So moving on, it's not just about functions, it's also about classes, arguments, methods, and everything. In this example, we have string name and string age, works just fine. In this case, we have an interface and we have an implementation of this interface. And if you take a look at line 5 and line 10, we have renamed. Instead of name, we have named as full name. So what are we going to use? PHP is going to follow the rename. So if you rename a method's parameter, it's going to force you to use the renaming one. If you didn't know that PHP allows you to do that, don't do it, because it's not a common best practice. But if you do, it's going to follow the rename. Named arguments is very good for Booleans, constructors. If they're good or not, this is another discussion. But for example, on line 14, you have new user, true, false, and no. Like, how the hell? What true means? What false means? What does new mean? And if you have named arguments, it's way easier to understand. I have a user, which is an admin, which is not active, and they're not. It has no rules. So this is easier to understand when you have named arguments, and this is what PHP 8 is bringing. I have a slide here which covers all the permutations that you can have with named arguments. You can have in random order. This is the biggest advantage of named arguments. You don't need to follow the order of the arguments anymore. If you have optional arguments, you can specify one or another. In this case, both arguments 1 and 2, they are optionals, but you just want to change the value of the argument 2. So this is easier with named arguments. This is actually possible just because of named arguments. And you can skip if you don't start with named arguments and then later on you decided to use named arguments. For example, here on line 13, this is allowed. But if you decided not to use and then you use it again on argument 2, but then on argument 3 you don't use it, this is not allowed because PHP lost track on how to analyze this thing. So you need to follow either everything or don't skip it, because it's not going to work. And that's named arguments. Couple of questions. Can we mix it, named arguments and normal arguments in some methods of call? Yeah, this is what I have just showed here. And then the last feature that I want to talk about PHP 8 is attributes. And you probably know attributes as annotations, decorators, and a bunch of other names that other languages have. But in PHP, is going to call attributes. And attributes, see it as annotations or something that gives your class, your properties, your variables, properties, attributes. And here we have an example with doctrine. So this class is an entity, and both properties, they are columns. And the first and the property ID is an ID. You can do that with annotations nowadays, but think that every single project that wants to have this mechanism needs to implement its own an annotation or attributes library. Doctrine has a famous one, doctrine annotations. If you work with serialization, if you work with Symfony, all those projects, they have their own implementation. So what if we could centralize that in PHP? And PHP 8 brought that. So just a quick disclaimer. Annotations is something that we use to document our code, and attributes is something that we use to give attributes to classes, to properties, and so on. And then on PHP 8, we're going to have something like this. It's very similar to annotations, but are not annotations. They're attributes. And this is going to be checked by PHP's engine, by PHP source code. So now we can cache, we can validate, we can extend, we can implement, we can do a lot of stuff with attributes. And it's very similar. This is the syntax that was chosen. This is the Rust-like syntax, but it's very similar to what we have nowadays. And it's going to work. On PHP 8, we're going to have attributes native. This is going to help a lot. Some projects that have custom implementations, some frameworks, and so on. We're going to have caching, optimization, as I said. And annotations are going to be for documentation, and attributes are going to be for attributes themselves. One quick disclaimer and one important thing. Attributes need to be supported by your library, framework, or whatever you're using. PHP is not going to convert automatically annotations to attributes. Your projects need to support that. There's a whole section in the RFC document that proposes this thing, how you can implement that using reflection. And there you go. These are the 4 biggest features of PHP. Yeah, Python even goes even further and allows you to rename internally or externally, but PHP only allows you to use the name that you give to the API. But that's something for later on. Some changes is not breaking changes, but are changes to PHP 8. Previously, if you try to use throw as an expression, you couldn't. Now on PHP 8, you can. So know all those ifs. If something is not set, throw an exception. Now you can do. I can either have the variable nullable or throw an exception. You can have exceptions on short closures and a lot of other things that before PHP 8 you weren't allowed. But now we have made this change to throw, which is not a breaking change. It's just a change, and it's going to simplify a lot of code from a lot of stuff. Can you mix comment and attribute? Yes, that's allowed. But keep in mind that if your project does not support attributes, it's not going to work. Another small change to PHP 8. Some people have very specific exceptions, and they use exception domains, and they don't need the exception object, because this is handled by the error handling by some upstream project that is taking care of exceptions. So they don't need the variable. Now this is allowed. You can catch an exception without passing the variable, and then just throw whatever you need. This is a small change, but people ask, we have made it, is there. One important change, this is not a breaking change, but this is a deprecation warning. If you take a look at line 3, we have something that is not right, which is an optional argument followed by a required argument. It's not because PHP allows you to do that you should. This is not right. If you take all the books, everything about dependency injection, about computer science and everything, you should first declare your required arguments and then your optional arguments, because this is how you treat an API, right? But PHP allow you to do that. So we have some folks out there which have done this in the past, but this is deprecated on PHP 8 and is going to be removed all the way on PHP 9. So you're going to have a couple of versions to fix this. Don't get crazy if you see these deprecation warnings at first. These are just deprecation warnings, but take in consideration that you need to fix this for PHP 9 in the future. This is going to be removed in a future major version of PHP, but this is deprecated on PHP 8. As I said, this is a deprecation warning. Now the important break compatibility changes, and this is how you're going to see how difficult it's going to be for you to upgrade your code from your whatever version you're using to PHP 8. First one, everything that was removed or that it was deprecated, sorry, in the PHP 1, 0, 2, 3, and 4 is now removed on PHP 8. So if you were using anything that was deprecated on PHP 7, in PHP it's not going to work because it's removed. There's an extensive list here. You can check the official pull request on the PHP source code. Is open source. There is everything, but just keep in mind, if you're using something that was deprecated, now it's removed. Simple as that. This one, apart from being a release manager of PHP 8, I also did some contributions to PHP 8, and this was my one. Sorry, I break your code, but this example illustrates something that was allowed in the past, but now on PHP 8 is not going to be allowed anymore. Magic methods of PHP, in the past, they weren't being validated how you type them. So in the past, you could have such thing as a class foo with a method toString returning a Boolean. This is not right. It's supposed to return a string. So on PHP 8, we're gonna type and check. We're gonna check if you type your magic method. It's not required, it's not mandatory. If you don't use types with PHP, you can still don't use them. But if you use, we're gonna check them. There's an extensive list on this RFC, which is the formal document that we propose to PHP internals to change PHP. And we are gonna, you're gonna have all the lists with all the changes that you need to make to make your magic methods work. This one, I hope you agree with me that dividing an empty array with an array that is 42 makes 0 sense. In the past, PHP would return you 0, 1, or our number, but you know, it doesn't make sense. So we have removed it. It's not working anymore on PHP 8. The same way, if you try to increment a class, if you try to increment an array, that's not going to work. Okay, this is removed on PHP 8. Stack analyzer tools, for example, Damien's one, which is exact, PHP Stan, Passalm, Fan, all the stack analyzer tools that we have in the PHP ecosystem, all of them were already reporting this in previous versions. So if you're using stack analyzer tool, don't worry about these changes because it's not going to affect you. And last but not least, this is the biggest breaking change of PHP 8, more specific on line 6. There is a whole meme in the community saying 0 is equal to full. Yeah, for PHP in the past it was true, but now it's not true any longer. Okay, 0 is not equal to a string in any sense, except for integers and floats, because that makes sense. But like empty strings with stuff, this is true in the past, but now is false, and this is going to break a lot of code. But again, don't use double sign. Okay, use the triple sign. Have types in your code. This is going to make your life way easier. But if you do use the double equal sign, pay attention, because if you're doing this kind of comparison, it's going to break your code. And the last one, which I don't think should impact a lot of people, but is a breaking change. PHP in the past would cast a string which starts with a number to just the number. So this is why 42 is equal to 42 full, because PHP casts 42 full to 42. But this is no longer true, and this is going to break your code if you have such thing. Okay. Those are the breaking changes. Some internal changes that I want to share with you. I'm going to hurry with the slides because I'm getting out of time. But there's an API on PHP called Reflection, which basically tells you everything that you want to know about a function, a class, a property of a class, and so on. Before PHP 8, if you try, for example, to reflect the function array filter, you would have no type information at all. Like, what is the type of the first argument? What is the type of the second argument? What is the return type of array filter? Previously, none, zero. You had no information. On PHP 8, you're going to have shit tons of information. Every single internal function now is typed. This was a forced task. It was amazing. It was painful to add support to everything. But if you have, for example, a library which is using reflection and you were demanding these things, now is in the source code of PHP 8. There are a couple of projects that depends on this, and there's a project from JetBrains which is specifically for this thing, and probably they're going to deprecate this project in the future because now we have this information on PHP 8 source code. And then you can check it out the slides later, but it's basically a API that PHP has, which is Reflection, which tells you a lot of information. Again, this is an internal change. Probably you're not going to use this thing in your daily work, but if you maintain a library that depends on Reflection, you're going to, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking with you that maintains a library that depends on Reflection, and you don't have type information. Now you have. It's such an improvement for the language. Was huge, was painful, was long, but we made it. It's there. And the last topic, I have 2 minutes to talk about this thing, which are the behind the scenes of PHP 8. We have a couple of people which is behind PHP. As I got introduced, I'm one of the release managers of PHP 8. This is the PHP 8 logo, by the way. A lot of people are asking if this is the official one. Yes, this is the official one, which was made by a French, which I forgot his name, if someone remembers his name, Vincent. Vincent was the creator of the elephants, the designer of the elephants, and he also designed the PHP 7 logo, and he also designed the PHP 8 logo. So this is why I have this hoodie. So we have 2 release managers, Sarah and I. We are responsible for taking care of the PHP 8 release cycle, making sure that every 4 weeks we have a new release of PHP. We need to make sure that everything's working, everything's buildable, everything's free of bugs, which we can't, but I ran out of time. So let's hurry up. I just want to give a couple of shout outs to some contributors of the PHP source code, which are Dimitri. He was the creator of JIT. Nikita, he's working on behalf of JetBrains in the source code. He has done more than 10 RFCs, which is amazing. We have Christoph, which is doing the bridge between Microsoft and PHP. So if you run PHP on Windows, this is the one that is allowing you to do that. We have Jacob, with his taking care of the FPM SAP of PHP. We have Matteo, which organized the PHP Day in Italy. He's taking care of the PayDO extension. We have Tyson, which works for Fan, which is a stack analyzer too. And he's bringing a lot of stuff to the PHP source code. We have these 2 gentlemen that they were the ones that helped us to do the reflection for stack that I mentioned. Imagine changing 2,000 plus functions in a language to have type information. So these 2, we work around the clock to have that information add to the source code. Those are the ones that helped you. All these names, they are clickable. You can go to their GitHub, and also they have GitHub sponsors. So if you want to sponsor PHP to keep evolving, here's an example of how you should do that. We have new contributors. Alex was the first African contributor that we had, hence in the fact that PHP is an open source global language. He was the first African contributor that we had. We have Elijah, which he's not a maintainer, but a contributor to PHP Stan. He also made a lot of contributions to PHP 8. For example, Match, he was the one that created Match. So if you want to thank him, he's the one. And we also have some famous people. Benjamin from Doctrine, he was the one that created attributes. And we have Nicholas, which is a French one, which he is the member of Symfony. He also contributed to PHP 8. He made an interface called Stringable. And yeah, we have even the community Doctrine, Symfony, Laravel, whatever, giving back to PHP and improving PHP source code. So this is huge. This is amazing. Unfortunately, I need to rush because we have very limited amount of time. But I'm going to share the slides with you. There's a whole document that I have created, which is everything that I have found in terms of reference for PHP 8. All the official references, blog posts around there, all the talks that I have found, all the RFCs, everything that has changed inside the PHP source code, you're going to have the links here. So there's a lot of things that you need to go through if you want to support PHP 8. But yeah, PHP 8 is here. PHP 8 is there. PHP 8 is going to come on the end of November. I'm so excited. It's a new major version of PHP. It's a new cycle. It's a new era, as I like to say, for PHP 8. PHP 8 is coming, and is here to stay. Is here to prove that PHP is not dead. PHP is evolving. PHP is growing. PHP is going to become a huge language in the future. I can't wait to PHP to grow even more. And that's it. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to talk about everything. So please go check it out, the slides. We have a bunch of reference that you can see. And one thing that I ask you, give me feedback. If I can click this link, yes, I can. Because with this feedback, I can improve my talk for the next conference. And